Welcome to Gino's garage. We're going to be working on our 1984 PT40 today. If you've been watching the weather, we're in Tampa and there's a potential hurricane coming our way, so we're either going to leave with this, or if it goes by us and we lose power, we'll have this to stay in and while the power's out. So I just wanted to, the generator's actually due for an oil change, so we're going to get into that today. So get in here, you got to release this lever and then go around the driver's side and this little door here. This is an 84.5 they call it, so they move the radiator to the side for the generator. And inside this bay there's a switch right here that pushes the slide out, or the generator out. So we have that out. We're going to run this, get it up to temperature. I'm just going to check the oil and whatnot before we actually get into it. So the oil dipstick, you can see, is back here. So it's up on there because it's been run before, so need to get a rag. Alright, so back where we were, let's pull this dipstick out. We'll wipe it off, double check the level right now before we run it. So it's a touch high, but always good to smell it. Doesn't smell like fuel. Yeah, for some reason it's a little bit full, but like I said, it doesn't smell like fuel, so I don't think it's from that. It might just be the way it's leaning right now. So we'll go ahead and change that. Change the oil after we get it up to temperature. There's a start switch on the side of the generator. Probably not going to be able to see it, but back there. We can actually start the generator from here. I'm not going to do that because it's kind of loud because the exhaust is not connected. So I'm going to roll it back in. We'll start it. We'll load it up. Coolant level's fine. Kind of block the light, but it's inside of here, so that's all good. I think everything is good. We'll double check the air filter. So there's a fuel filter here, and the oil filter is right up under here. It's hard to see. And I change the oil in this model every 150 hours because there's two oil pans for this. This is a V1505 Kubota engine, and there's a shallow oil pan and a deep oil pan. The deep oil pan has 200-hour oil change interval. The shallow pan has 150 hours. So I believe this is the shallow pan, so we do it at 150 hours. And we are just a touch over that 150 hours right now, so it's due for its change. We'll also inspect the air filter. I do that every other change. And I keep a log on an Excel spreadsheet of, the maintenance interval on this engine and the bus engine and everything else. So you'll also see that I don't know if it'll show up. I also write the hours on the actual oil filter. So there's 2 hour meters. There's one on the actual control box back here on the generator, and then there's one inside. So that's why you see the 2 different hours on that. So one is the inside hour meter and one is the generator hour meter. Just in case one of those quits, I keep track of both of them. So we'll run this back in. Again, over here, the little button here. Just so it's not so loud. And we'll go inside and start it up and transfer the load to it. So I always like to make sure on the 84, there's right by the door here, there's a little transfer switch. This is the manual transfer switch. So right now we're on shore 50 amp. So you shouldn't start the generator with that on generator. Always start either off if you don't have power, or not, or on one of the shore settings. You don't want to load. You don't want to have a load on that generator while it's starting. So we'll go ahead. We have 2 starter switches in this bus. One up here just above the dryer. If you go to the right, that primes it. It runs the fuel pump and also the glow plugs. She's a little cold, so there it goes. You hear the fan kick in, which is good, which means you know you're putting out power. Now all these gauges up front on the right hand side are for the generator, so you want to double check everything. So oil pressure is good, temperature, voltage. We're putting out 120 volts on both legs. We don't have any load right now. So right now I currently have no big loads on inside the bus, no air conditioners or anything. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and swap over to the generator. So now we are on generator power. Everything is still good. What we'll do is turn on a couple of these air conditioners to really put some load on the generator. So I like to wait a second, let them kick in. We'll go with the back one. We'll just do 2 for right now. This thing gets a little finicky with 3 for some reason. I think it has something to do with a new voltage regulator we put in it. Everything seems to be good. We'll come back in a little while after we let it run for a little bit under load, let it cool down, and then we'll change the oil. Alright, so we've been running for a minute or 2, and we've got up to temperature there. It really doesn't get much higher than that because our fan runs all the time. So it runs right around there. So we should be good on temperature wise. We'll cut off these air conditioners. You can hear the load. Drop that. Alright, so we'll swap this back to shore. So everything is back to normal. So we have no load on the generator now. And then we can shut the generator down since it doesn't have any load on it. Alright, so we got the generator up to operating temperature. I'll roll it back out here so it has a chance to cool down. We'll get our supplies all together. So we're well up to temperature there. We'll get all our supplies together so we're ready to drain the oil. So I got our Gino supply tote out of the bay. So we'll get a new oil filter. From there, we have spare rate core filters. That's another oil filter. I don't think I have any fuel filter. Of the spin-on fuel filter, doesn't look like. So we'll have to replenish that in our stock. All right, so this is, I think it's a 19 millimeter. It's pretty close to 3/4 as well. There's a little hole here. Tightening. I guess I'm tightening dummy. What in the heck? I was going the right way the first time. Dummy. This is gonna make a mess.
definitely due for a change. Snug that up. Hit this with a little bit of spray, clean off excess oil. Leaks, and then we'll go to the oil filter.
So Bluebird was nice enough to leave us a little access panel here. So that gets you right to the oil filter. Cobwebs out of here.
Pull this filter off. Oh, it's tight.
Handling this slick pig. Are you close enough to see anything?
Mm-hmm. It's like turning. It's so slickery. Come on. Ooh, this thing's got a mile of thread on it. Almost there. There we go. Of course. Start spilling everywhere. Come on. Fucking wires right there in the way, of course.
Pre-charge the filter. Oh, as I dump it all over the place. Jeez. That's awesome. Edit. Pig. Got it all oily, but we'll wipe it down real good once we get it in there. It's so slick, you don't want to spin. Just hand tighten these. You saw how tight it was on there before, and I just hand tighten it, so snug it up to it's tight. Should be good enough. So we got the air filter out. This is for this model of generator. It's a little dirty. I'm going to order one. I don't have one in stock right now. So we'll just blow this one off a little bit and then put it back in there for now. And then I should have some in a couple days. It's easy enough to change. It just, this little cap comes off of that tube there. You loosen this T-handle here, and this cap comes off, and then there's a wing nut that holds it in there on that threaded rod. Alright, so we're going to pop this back in here. Said I'm going to replace this once we get a new one. There's a little O-ring that goes on the wing nut. So make sure that's on there. Snug that guy up. Make sure it's snug in there so it's making a seal. We'll blow this out. It's got a little junk in here. And this goes, you got to put it up like that, top. So, slides on there, and then this wing nut tightens down. Alright, good enough. So we're going to pull these injector lines. Oh, damn. It's not quite the right side. It's all the paint on there. Ooh, sucker's on there tight. Guessing these are metric. $17mm. There she goes. Just want to keep an eye on these, make sure you're not spinning the bottom half of the injector. I blew the top of this engine off with an air hose. So go ahead and start working on these. Ooh, there we go. Kind of have to work your way to the middle. They got these so close together. Come on. There she is. Give me a 5/16 or a screwdriver to get this off. Just take the thing out of my way. In between there.
Ones are bigger.
So I've got my cap set. You can kind of swing these up even though they're held in there. So you can work your way back. Just be careful about not getting anything in the injector next to it before you put the cap on it. Don't we have those little red caps? Just gonna put a little rag down here to catch some of this fuel. I like to cap all this stuff as you go so you don't get anything in it. The lines, since they're upside down right now, are fine. Oops. Those caps. So you can see this thing's kind of swung back already out of the way. Pull these last two injector lines off. It's a little hard getting fingers in here. So that cap on there. These will come out of here without removing this other plate. See if I have a thin socket that might go over those. 17 millimeter. I might have to pull that. So it looks like you don't have to pull the intake manifold off, so I thought these kept down the things, but they don't. I'm putting these in order in here. I'll do these two and then I'll work on the other side. So I'm pulling these O-rings off. I got a replacement nitrile O-ring. So we matched it up to an O-ring kit I have. These are nitrile O-rings. It's a pretty close fit. This one's a little loosey-goosey, so we went with just a touch tighter, but it's a nice fit on there. So again, just make sure that spring is centered in there. You kind of slide it over the spring and then tighten it down. Put the cap back on it so we don't get any stuff in there. Snug it down. And I'm paying attention to keep these in the same spot that they came out of. I think it's hugely critical, but it's a good practice. Oh, that sucker's stuck. There she goes. Those loose. Pull these out. And using this socket, you don't really have to worry about doing them in order technically, because you can fit down in there. It's just thin enough socket that fits over it in between the two. So just gotta be careful. These little paint off of this stuff likes to fleck off, go into stuff, so just keep an eye on it. You don't want any of that stuff in this fuel system. Get this one back on there first. That ought to be nice. Got that hole covered up, so I don't have to worry about dropping anything in that one. This thing was a touch smoky, but I don't know, we'll see. This is what's causing it. These Kubotas tend to run a touch rich anyways. See, here's some of that damn paint on my fingers. Okay, just make sure you get that spring in there again. So we'll tighten these back up. Make sure they're all snug. Alrighty. Alright, so we're going to start putting these fuel lines back on. We'll start with these two. On this end. Start getting them started. Go up on here. You can see you can kind of pull this other set out of your way while you're working on these two. It's a 17 millimeter wrench again. So kind of fold these guys over. This might not want to start so good. So I'm going to try to snug up this inside one first. And then I can do this outside one. You can see these little paint chips that come off of these nuts, so you got to be real careful not getting that paint in the fuel line or anything. Using the wrench backwards just because that's the way it fits in here better. So that's pretty snug. Double check that this one's snug. I'm going to leave these loose up top here because we're going to have to bleed these anyway, so then we'll work our way out. So we'll pull this one off. Snug it down, and then we should get the last one here. Alrighty, put this intake snorkel back on and we'll be ready to try to crank this thing. Alright, so I'll do a little lesson here. So what you're actually messing with here is these are what they call injectors, but really in this instance it's just a injector tip. So it's basically a spring-loaded it's a spring-loaded sprayer, for lack of a better term. But so what it does, this is the actual injection pump right here. It runs off of the engine camshaft, and well, there's a gear up front here off the gear train that turns this pump. So that pump has basically a little camshaft in it, and it's pumping these little pumping elements and forcing fuel up through these lines. It creates pressure. Once the pressure reaches a certain level and overcomes the spring in here, that's when it sprays out the fuel. So as this thing rotates around, it's constantly pushing fuel through there and overcoming that spring and spraying fuel in. That's how your injection pump works on one of these Kubota engines. Very similar on a Cat 3208. You just have 8 of these instead of, you got a little V8 pump basically that pumps fuel. So the biggest thing right now is we have air in all these lines. So you don't want air trapped in this column, because otherwise you're not going to build enough pressure for the injector to fire. So we're going to crank this over. We've got these loose, and we're going to crank it over till we start to get a little bit of fuel out of these. And then once it starts to spit a little fuel, then we'll tighten them up, and then hopefully it'll fire. So we didn't film it, but we went ahead and we filled it with oil. I'm just going to double check. So yeah, I got nice clean oil. We're up here. Full mark's way up here, so we're just below the full mark. So that's all good to go. So we're going to give it a couple cranks here. There's a switch back here on the engine. I'm going to run the pump for a little bit. So if you push down on the button, it'll run the fuel pump. There we go. You see, watch this guy here. See, it started to spit a little fuel. That one back there just started spitting fuel. That one's now spitting fuel. So you can just tighten those up with your fingers. There it goes. So now we'll just tighten them up. It should fire off. This is the shutdown lever, so if the electronic shutdown doesn't work, you can always come out here and manually push this lever. It'll turn the engine, shut the engine down. So I'll slide this guy back in here. I'm gonna have to get a new tube. My tube split here. Come on, man. Cooperate. There we go. All right. So we'll spray this down, clean off that little bit of fuel, wipe up the mess, and should be ready to go. Just spraying down this area, getting a little bit of that fuel off of it. Some brake clean. That should be good. It's just the oil coming off of it, I think. Hey, did you know that Gino's Garage is a merchandise store? We have t-shirts, coffee cups, stickers, and more. Just click the link in the description below and you can browse all of our products.